Okay, and finally this week, a separate lecture on the Kurdish Workers' Party. And like I said, the reason I'm singling this group out is because there's a specific test question about the PKK that actually that actually kind of straddles two chapters, because we have this chapter that involves Russian and European organized crime, and so PKK is a European group, Turkey, European, close enough. Um, and, and then it also is appropriate for the chapter on the relationship between organized crime and terrorism, because the PKK is considered a terrorist group. A lot of the much of the information that I'm going to relay to you um, in this lecture comes from this article. Hopefully, it'll come across. Hopefully, you can see that. I'll hold it up here. Hopefully, long enough that you can grab down the title. You'll recognize the first name on there is the author of your textbook, and so some of this information will sound familiar since there's information about the Kurdish Workers' Party in your textbook. But also, Murat Server is a Turkish criminal justice student, Kurdish doctoral student finishing up or has just finished his PhD at San Diego State. And he's a good friend of mine. He currently, once he finishes his degree, if he hasn't already, he'll be continuing his service with the with the Turkish National Police. But there you go. That's the article most of this information's come from, and so you've had a chance to copy down that in case you're working on a paper about the Russian mob, or you're working on a paper about not a paper about the Russian mob. If you're working on a paper about the relationship between terrorism and organized crime, this is a very good paper for you to read. If you're looking at European organized crime, this is also a very good paper about the PKK. And I'm not just saying that because both the authors are friends of mine. All right, enough of that. Hold that back up. That's better than looking at your face for another 30 minutes. Fine. I'm not holding that up for 30 minutes, or however long it takes me to talk about the PKK. All right. The PKK. In 2007, Turkey declared. That's not where I want to start. Where do I want to start? Kurdish Workers' Party. Formed in the late 70s, about 27 November 1978 in Diyarbakir, Turkey. Formed really on or around Marxist-Leninist policy. So remember, this is 1978 during the Soviet era, and so these were the guys that formed this, particularly their leader, Abdullah Öcalan, very heavily into Marxism. And so this group formed under Marxist-Leninist principles or doctrine. Their stated goal when they formed was their goal was to create an independent Kurdish state in southeast Turkey and some parts of the neighboring countries. Since then, their stated goal has changed from having their own country to just having more autonomy within the nation of Turkey, which is something they've had a little of on and off since. But that's never really been their real goal. Perhaps it is today, but through the 80s and 90s, at least the first half of the 90s, their real goal was to spread socialism in the region. This is something that Abdullah Öcalan, their leader, has admitted publicly after his imprisonment, that his real goal was to spread socialism in the region. And so I've got to wonder, and it's not any of the research that I've read, I've got to wonder if maybe he was a tool of the Soviet Union at some point. This particular group has gone under a number of names. Of course, they're currently known as the Kurdish Workers' Party. They've also been known as the Congress for Freedom and Democracy in Kurdistan. One of their other current names is the Kurdistan People's Congress, or Kongrgel, Kongra-Gel, terrorist group by any other name. They have a vast population of oppressed people to draw members from. I mean, there are, in the Middle East, there are about 30 million Kurdish people that are linked by ethnicity and language, actually a pair of languages, that are from what used to be the nation of Kurdistan. That particular nation takes up, would have been, or where the old nation of Kurdistan used to, where the former nation of Kurdistan used to be, now is eastern Turkey, northern Iraq, western Iran, and parts of Syria and Armenia. Real pleasant part of the world. And between 1978 and 1982, they were primarily a political party. They were trying to incite political revolution. They were doing it through political means. And about 1982, Abdullah Öcalan, Akalar, A-C-A-L-A-R, Akalar, or Akalar, decided that the democratic political means were not working. They were not achieving their goals through traditional political movement, and so they decided to shift to terrorism. And in '82, they made a conscious decision, a very deliberate decision to engage in terrorism. In fact, when I say it was a deliberate decision, just to kind of underscore this idea that they were consciously going to terrorism, it wasn't actually until 1984, until actually August of '84, that they committed their first terrorist act. They spent 2 years almost 2 years after making the decision to become a terrorist group, planning and recruiting and building their forces. And then in August of '84, they acted. They engaged in guerrilla warfare in Turkey. They kidnapped Western tourists visiting Turkey. By the 90s, they were engaging in suicide bombings. 1993, they actually had a coordinated effort where they attacked Turkish embassies in 6 different Western European countries. By the mid-1990s, they were engaging in open warfare, open attacks against civilian villages, attacking thousands of civilian villages in southeastern and eastern Turkey, killing at least 37,000 Turkish people, often Kurds that they were killing. In 1999, around February, the Turkish government had finally had enough and had decided to take a military crackdown and managed to capture Abdullah Öcalan. Caught him. He was hiding. He had been living in Syria and Lebanon. Had been forced to leave Syria under some pressure. He had been in Syria. He had sought political asylum. The Turkish government put enough pressure on Syria. He fled to Greece. The Greeks were giving him sanctuary for a while, and about February '99, give or take, the Greek government, also under pressure from Turkey, forced him out, denied him asylum, and he was captured in Greece. He was promptly tried and convicted of treason, sentenced to death. He's been awaiting his execution ever since. There doesn't seem to be, and the Turkish government apparently does not seem to be any big rush to execute Öcalan. And currently he is being imprisoned in the Marli Island, which is near Istanbul. After Öcalan's capture, the group itself, the Kurdish Workers' Party itself, withdrew. It withdrew its operations and concentrated itself into northern Iraq. While in northern Iraq, it renounced its armed struggle and once again became a political party. Though we still consider, the United States, Turkey still consider them terrorists, they called a ceasefire. They ceased terrorist activities. They stopped the bombings. They stopped the guerrilla warfare. They said, okay, we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to be a political party. And for 5 years, they stuck to their words. They no violent action by the PKK for 5 years. And then in 2004, once again, and under the direction of Abdullah Öcalan, who was in prison, directs the PKK to once again begin terrorist activities. They called off their ceasefire in 2004. There was a group actually called the Kurdistan Freedom Hawks. It was a branch of the PKK that returned their group to guerrilla-style warfare, probably with their most notable spike in violence in 2007. Despite the fact that Abdullah Öcalan is in prison, and has been in prison since the end of the last century, he remains the leader of the PKK and continues to, most probably through communications passed on by his attorney or a team of attorneys, Öcalan continues to lead the PKK, and he is their primary leader. He has been described as a micromanager. He has his fingers in just about everything they do. Though there is a hierarchy under him. Directly beneath him is a chairman council, which generally will receive his orders passed on to him by the attorneys. There is a central committee that handles organization, division of operations. Underneath the central committee would be a provincial committee that handles different cells within the different provinces. Each city has a local committee, and then under this local committee would be the different working cells, and then they also have a central disciplinary board. Now, so far, all I've really described is a terrorist group, and you're thinking, oh, that's really great, Dr. Day, but this isn't a class course on terrorism, and this isn't the chapter on terrorism, and I would say that's fine. And prior to 1991, they were primarily just a terrorist group, though the German authorities will tell you differently. But primarily, prior to 1991, they were primarily a political group or a terrorist group. They got funding and support from not just the Soviet Union, but from Cyprus and Greece and Armenia, Libya, Iran, Iraq, Bulgaria, and Cuba. And that'll list a who's who in the world. Syria itself actually served as a major haven, a good hiding place for members of the PKK, though in 1998, Syria removed its protection, which is coincidentally about the time Öcalan ran to Greece. However, with the fall of the Soviet Union, the PKK began a transition to crime. When they lost the funding of the Soviet Union, they began to look into criminal activity. They got involved in drug traffic. They got involved in arms smuggling, robbery, extortion, smuggling of illegal workers, dealt in money laundering. You think about what would make this terrorist group be able to do this? Well, they had a prime location. Like in real estate, when they say, what's the most important thing in selling a home? Well, location, location, location. Well, the PKK's got wonderful location. Their home base in Turkey borders Iran, Iraq, Georgia, Armenia, Syria, Greece, Bulgaria, and Azerbaijan, and they have access to about 5,000 miles of coastland in Turkey. Combine that with a fairly strong organizational structure that they had as their days as a political party and a terrorist organization, makes them ideal for drug smuggling and organized crime. And drug smuggling is a wonderful profit for them. Consider that they handle a lot of the drugs that come through Turkey, and Turkey being a major transit route for heroin coming out of Southwest Asia, out of that area we call the Golden Crescent. And then consider this. You could purchase just 1 kilo of heroin in Afghanistan or Thailand for somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 US. If you just smuggle it into Turkey and sell it, you can sell it for anywhere between $6,000 and $8,000. If you were to transport it out of Turkey, like PKK does, and take it, say, to Germany, you could then sell it wholesale. It's anywhere between $20,000 and $80,000. Retail, which means street value, of that 1 kilo of heroin is about $200,000. You can imagine buying something at $1,000 a kilo, selling it for $200,000. There's a small bit of profit there. But heroin isn't their only product. They also sell hashish, morphine. They grow and cultivate coca and coca plants. They also do cocaine and opium. But they are heavily into transporting. About 80%, according to the German prosecutors, about 80% of the drugs produced in the Golden Crescent are being trafficked through Turkey by the PKK. And so they are certainly an organized crime group in that aspect. They are involved when it comes to drug trafficking, like other organized crime groups or other organized crime groups, depending on whether or not you consider them to be organized crime. The PKK handles the production phase. They're involved in production. They're involved in both wholesale and retail distribution, and they're involved in the trafficking. And so, like drug cartels, like major groups like La Cosa Nostra, they are heavily involved in all aspects of the drug trade. And in this case, most particularly opium. Now, at this point, you may be torn. Are they a terrorist group? Are they organized crime? Are they both? Let me add you a statement. Akalar and other PKK leaders have stated publicly that the only purpose for their narcotics trafficking is to purchase weapons for the cause. And so, I don't know if the purpose of the drug trafficking will affect your opinion as to whether or not they are organized crime, whether they're terrorism, whether they're some sort of hybrid, which is something you have to decide for yourself and state your decision and your reasons for it on the final exam. But it's not just narcotics. That first statement where they say, well, we do this just to support the cause, might say, okay, they're terrorists that just do this for funding. And if that's all they did, if the trafficking was all they did, maybe that would be a good argument, but that's not all they do. The PKK also gets involved in trafficking illegal immigrants. That is both, for them, it is both a source of revenue, also a source of potential recruits. When we talked about about trafficking and people, one of the sources for people to traffic are people living in oppressive regimes. And so a lot of the illegal people they're illegally trafficking are actually Kurds that are being moved out of eastern Turkey and northern Iraq for a profit. And I do mean profit. These people are generally moved on the same routes they use for the drug trade. Probably one of their most popular routes is taking people out of northern Iraq and delivering them into Italy, though they do have other European destinations. In 2001, there were about 9,000 Kurds smuggled out of northern Iraq, and usually they go from northern Iraq, and then the route goes one of three ways. It may go to Istanbul and then on to Milan. It may go to Istanbul and then to Bosnia and Milan. And that one I had to think, okay, I'm fleeing the devastation and the warfare in Iraq, and so the last place I want to go through is another country just like the one I left, so, let's go through Bosnia. And then third would be go to generic place in Turkey, and then do Tanzania, then to Malta, and the rest of Italy. Profit-wise, they're making about 2,000 to 3,000 per person trafficked. As an individual, it would cost you about 6,000 or 7,000 euro for about 6,000 to 7,000 euros. You can get traffic, you can get transportation and assistance and papers and things like that from the PKK. They will help you get out of northern Iraq and into any of 4 glorious vacation destination spots, including Berlin, Vienna, Paris, or London. One little caveat to this, I told you they use the drug routes. Well, they often use the transported children as mules, realizing that in most of Europe, children under a certain age cannot be held criminally liable for their actions, and so they get used as drug mules. Let's see, what else the PKK into? They're into extortion. Extortion, there's not much to say about that, except that I would like to point out to you that their victims tend to be other Kurds living in eastern and southeastern Turkey. And the reality is, they tell you, if you don't pay, you might be kidnapped, have your family kidnapped, we'll vandalize or destroy your home or your business if you don't pay, and they dress it up. Rather than it being a protection racket, they dress it up. They tell their potential victims that it is a voluntary contribution or a revolutionary tax, and so what they're really doing is contributing to the great cause. And really, in reality, they're lining the pockets of the PKK leaders. And then finally, the final specific crime I want to talk about is money laundering, and I want to talk about it because they kind of a unique way of doing it. We have the Sicilians. They use the pizza parlors and the laundromats and cash-only businesses. The PKK uses television. I guess somewhere in Europe they do cash payments for cable TV. Because what the PKK did was they set up what they called MedTV, M-E-D-TV, the MedTV broadcasting company. They had offices in London, Brussels, Germany, and Luxembourg, they were a satellite TV network launched in 1995 with a broadcasting tower in London. They claimed to be an independent television station. Strangely enough, most of their programming turned out to be PKK propaganda, but they were an independent TV station. The evidence, and the reason I say the reason we know they used the station as money laundering is in 1996, Interpol, in a well-coordinated operation, seized about $11 million U.S. When they raided all of their offices simultaneously. And while doing that, since they raided them simultaneously, I guess they caught the PKK with their pants down, so to speak, and actually managed to find files that linked the money that they found with the drug trafficking, with the weapons trafficking. Found a lot of documents supporting their in the Brussels office, the Brussels Belgium office. They found some documents linking the PKK and the radio and the TV station to their human trafficking operations. And so this operation was in 96. In 99, someone actually got the brilliant idea to shut the TV station down 3 years later. And didn't take very long. In 2000, just the very next year, they started Medya TV, or Medya TV, M-E-D-Y-A TV. Started up in 2000. Same cities with offices. Same story, second verse when it comes to money laundering. And about 2 years later, they raided Medya TV, found the same kind of evidence. As far as I know, Medya TV is still operating. In fact, I didn't think about it, but let's look on our handy-dandy internet. And we'll look here, M-E-D-Y-A TV, Medya TV. And yep, they have a website. Let's see, Medja TV. Maybe even translated by Google. Oh, look at that. What you're hearing in the background is actually a broadcast from Medja TV. And since I don't speak that language. And hey, look at that. They actually have a Facebook page. Medja TV out of Istanbul, Turkey. That's what they list on their Facebook page. Oh, it's not actually. It's one of those interest pages. I'd have been a little disturbed there if they had their own Facebook page. They have a Twitter account. Isn't that nice? But there you go. So they still operate. And then in addition to all the other stuff, PKK, as I finish up, they get involved as do counterfeiting. They specialize in $100 U.S., $100 bills. They're into the sale of illegal cigarettes. And one last thing that I found really interesting from the Mitch Roth and Marat Server article was Marat mentioned, and I guarantee you, nothing against Mitch, but I guarantee you Marat wrote the paper. Blood smuggling. And just to whet your, I'm just going to mention that to whet your appetite. I'm going to mention that to whet your appetite, so maybe you'll read, and you'll find that most of the information I got came from this paper. Very well written. To whet your appetite to maybe read this article, I'll tell you that they got involved in blood smuggling, and there's a little bit about that in there. I just kind of found that disturbing, so I mentioned it so you would be interested in maybe reading Marat's article. Okay, well, that is that for this week. Next week is probably not as many videos. Next week will be Mexican drug trafficking operations. There I posted a couple, 2 or 3 video links on the Criminal Justice at ETBU Facebook page, and so if you have Facebook, I encourage you to look at those. In fact, the last one on the list is one that I actually showed in class earlier this week. You've actually gotten to the point where what I make videos for next week will be what I talked about this week and next week in class. Then after next week, you will no longer hear me say, well, and when I taught this in class, on the residential class, because you'll be ahead of them. And so we'll be talking about Mexican drug trafficking operations and Mexican drug trafficking operations and Afro-lineal crime. And so probably for that lecture will be probably focus my part of the lecture, my part of your learning on the Nigerian groups. And so that's it for this week. I will see you around the forums.